Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar, Vendor Risk, Find It Before It Finds You. We're so excited to have you here today. We've been preparing for a little while, and we're just absolutely thrilled that you can make it. We see quite a few participants on the line. We're so excited. So if you're having any problems dialing in, you can see down here that you have a couple of audio options. Both you can get in on your computer. You can also call in by phone. So if you're having any audio trouble, just look for this call button right here. And then as Dave mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, we'd love to hear your questions throughout the webinar about if you have vendor risk challenges, if you have any questions about monitoring vendor risk long term, any questions like that, we would love to hear them throughout the webinar. So you'll just submit those via the chat pane right here. Our friend Sarah at Onspring will be monitoring them, and then we'll take 10 minutes at the end to answer those questions.
All right. Well, we'll kick it off. This is Dave Hulson, and I'm here with my friend Chris Pantanius. And, from an RFP perspective, this is Dave. We started RFP365 back in 2012. As vendor selection consultants, we had been conducting our RFPs through email and Excel. And this was tremendously inefficient and often led to poor vendor participation. A bad relationship with your vendor is very risky behavior, and it has prompted a lot of talk between Chris and I over the years. I will come back and talk about the RFP process specifically if it is apropos to your process, and but it does fit into the larger vendor risk management world. So without further ado, here's my friend Chris Pantanius.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We appreciate you taking an hour to hang out with us. So first of all, just a quick disclaimer. If you were looking for smooth talking salespeople, you can probably tell already this is not Dave or me. We're product guys at heart, and we love helping people solve problems and, as we say around here, do their best work. So if you're looking for a webinar that's smooth and buttery and salesy, you might be disappointed. But if you're looking for honesty, maybe with a few awkward pauses, then you're in the right place.
And big foreheads.
Yes, plenty of that. So okay, with that out of the way, I'm happy to share a little bit about Onspring. We were founded in 2010, and we launched version 1 in 2013. It's a little known fact, but we actually started the company with the goal of helping people manage contracts and vendor due diligence. We quickly realized, though, that, and very early on, thankfully, that no two companies manage their processes in exactly the same way. So we began to architect a platform that would focus on flexibility, but without compromising on performance or intuitive design. So we've expanded since those days, and we now offer an entire vendor risk, audit, and compliance suite of solutions, as well as the ability for our clients to create their own solutions using the Onspring platform. Fortunately, though, since we were able to, since that time, also serve the needs of thousands of users across a variety of industries. So we've been fortunate to have the great opportunity to learn from those experiences, and we're looking forward to sharing them with you today. But like many of you, I suppose that Dave and I have something in common with you. We're kind of looking at vendor risk and third-party risk from two different sides. And so first, we're thinking about when we procure products or services for our own organizations. And then secondly, we have to consider when we are the vendor to our customers. And you're going to hear us kind of hit on a few key hallmarks, but one of those is respect, and Dave will get into that in a little bit. So what we wanted to kind of do was set the stage with some of the things that we're going to talk about and why this matters. So in thinking about vendors, and more specifically vendor risk, I've noticed how people respond is often shaped by the lens through which they are looking, and you can see some of those areas on the screen right now. Certainly areas that I'm sure we're all familiar with, but whether those impacts are to continued operations or information security and privacy, or perhaps the new frontier, fourth-party risk, and that's where you're assessing your vendors. Everyone's really just trying to get to the same thing, and that's meeting the needs of their clients. And it's safe to say, I think that no one wants to make headlines with an incident in the process. But still, we can't do and make everything ourselves. We need vendors. We depend on them every day to help us meet the needs of our clients and our employees. So like Dave said, we got together a few weeks ago to discuss vendor management. And I know what you're thinking. Really, two guys met to discuss vendor management? Oof, nerd alert. Well, it's actually true. We do like this stuff, and yeah, we probably are nerds. But I had a ton of questions for Dave, and this stuff is important to a lot of our clients, and we live it every day. So I kind of wanted to know just some basics. What makes an RFP good? How does someone know if they're even asking the right questions? And how can we, as companies who operate in this space, help people in this process while being also respectful of everyone's time? So if you've ever responded to an RFP, you know how it goes. It feels like you've answered the same question slightly differently, maybe for about the 100th time. And then Dave wanted to know from us, how we help our clients manage ongoing relationships and third-party and fourth-party risk. What about the due diligence process when something doesn't go to RFP, it's just gone to a decision? What happens then? And so, fortunately for everyone on the call, we've distilled this riveting conversation down to 3 things that you can do and hopefully remember. We like acronyms to help us remember things, and so I'm going to hand it back over to Dave, and he's going to tell you a little bit about our friend Pam.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Before I introduce you to Pam, I want to mention that most of our clients at RFP365 are tech-centered or healthcare-centered companies, and security, the information security risk is one of the hottest items out there. And so we see it both from, we have to respond to their vendor risk assessment questionnaires, and we also see it because through our platform, people issue RFPs to the vendors that they're trying to do business with. And so we see this both transactionally going through our system, and it is really interesting. There are some people who are really doing this well, and there are some people who are really opening themselves up to some risk, and that's why Chris and I started talking about this. And full disclosure, Chris and I went to college together, I don't know, like 20 years ago. So
yeah,
we were the two of the 3 guys on our floor that actually had computers back in the 90s, and so we've been really interested in technology since then.
Yeah, what did we have, Dave? We had, what, 2/3 of all the computers on our floor?
That's right.
Between the 2 of us?
Yep. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Pam. And Pam came about in our conversation about how to make an acronym that would work in this space, something that was easy to remember. Plan respectfully is the first part, and some of you may think, well, that's a weird respect term to put in there. Why respectfully? If you, in this process of selecting vendors and working with them, respect your stakeholders and your vendors, you'll be likely to get the information that you need in an efficient way and format. The vendors who bid on your projects, whether it's an RFP or not, the vendors who are trying to do business with you think about their return on investment. And so the more information you can give them, the more transparent you can be about your process, about your selection criteria, about what you expect from them as partners, the better. So respect starts from the very beginning at the planning process. The next part we'll talk about is the assessment, and we say obviously assess carefully, and your goal should be a fact-based side-by-side comparison. Long gone are these days when you can go with a vendor because of a relationship you have, because of a gut feeling. You really need to have the data, whether it's required in your management structure or from your board, whatever. You are looking for a partner, so don't rush this process and make sure that you have the data to back this up. The last part about monitoring consistently really goes past the vendor selection and much more into what Chris and the Onspring team handle, and that is monitoring your vendor relationships. Chris will talk more about this, but gathering feedback from stakeholders on a regular basis checking with the users, making sure they're using software that you buy, making sure they have a good relationship and tickets and issues are being handled. So we're going to break down each of these a little bit in the next couple of slides. And so that was Pam, and I hope if you walk away with anything, just remember to plan respectfully, assess carefully, and monitor consistently. So the first part about that is the upfront work. And planning respectfully requires a little bit of work upfront, and it's worth it. Of course, as I mentioned, not every vendor relationship starts with an RFP. Your organization may not require it. Many of these steps are the same, whether you do an RFP or not. But first and foremost, gather requirements. Write them down, categorize them. Start with an Excel spreadsheet. That's kind of the best way to do it, and make categories so you can filter down. You can mark who the stakeholder is. What's the priority? If you're doing a website redesign project, it may sound simple, but who should be involved? Marketing, IT, procurement. What about legal? So make sure that you engage. Make sure you at least ask all the major stakeholders. Let them bow out if they don't want to be part of this. But don't forget about somebody who can come in at the last minute and derail things. That is a huge, that just kills everyone's morale. Narrowing down the scope, or keeping the scope from creeping, I should say, is very important. If you gather your requirements, you can help prevent scope creep by asking the stakeholders to prioritize their requirements. You can then pass that along to your vendors and really focus in on what is important. So again, document the owners, the priorities. Put this down. If you don't have fancy software, that's fine. Excel, spreadsheets work great for that. Defining your deal breakers. This is the real meat of the first time you reach out to your vendors. When you approach potential vendors, make sure you talk about these deal breakers up front. We have seen some really horrible RFPs with 400 questions, only to find out that 5 of those questions were deal breakers, and 15 of the vendors were removed after they had answered all of these questions. So define your deal breakers up front. Be very transparent with your vendors. And whether you go to an RFP or not, this is something you can talk about on the phone. For example, if data storage is important to you, ask where the data is stored. If it's not in a suitable location for you, for your IT group, cut the cord right there and go on to your next vendor. Last part is consider multiple rounds. Don't underestimate this. If you want to do an RFI with 5 questions just to get your deal breakers out of the way, please do that. Your vendors will appreciate this. They would much rather spend 15 minutes on 5 questions than than dozens of hours on 400 plus questions. So that can really help you out, and you don't have to read as many responses, especially if you can select down, you can shortlist your vendors through each of the rounds of iterations. All right, so the next phase of this, after the planning phase, is the evaluation phase. And I'm a math person, and this is the phase that I love of any project. The numbers tell a really great story. And the whole point, if you do an RFP, the whole point is to do a side-by-side comparison where you can justify your feelings with some numbers and graphs. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see some graphs and things that come out of our system, and this is really what should help you tell a story. Defining your scoring methodology is the first part, and most of us use what's called weighted scoring. If you're not familiar with weighted scoring, it is simply a process of setting values for your sections or categories, and even going down to the question level. What is important? What is less important? What is not important at all? What's nice to have? All these things. And you can put numerical values to all this. The idea is to be able to see overall vendor fits. For example, the graph on the right-hand side, there are some companies there, and you can see the second company down has more points than anybody else. Well, that should confirm our feelings that, oh yeah, you know what, these guys really do have a handle on this. And then if you use weighted scoring the right way, you'll see from a categorical perspective where the strengths and weaknesses are. So you know kind of especially what you'll have to address maybe in your due diligence phase. Whether you do an RFP or not, objectivity is very important. So this starts by documenting your requirements so that you can compare results side by side. Not just look at proposals that have come in very salesy speak format, but really get them down into comparing answers, detailed answers side by side, letting the experts weigh in on this stuff. That's the last part here, bring in your experts. So your subject matter experts should come in and focus in on their specialties so that they can recommend the strengths and weaknesses and the vendors that with the facts supported. So they can, whether you use a scorecard that you've made in Excel or you use some fancy software, that is a really helpful mechanism. So as I mentioned, sometimes you use an RFP, sometimes you don't, but the whole point of this is to start to whittle down and select some vendors. And then, of course, Chris, there are things you have to do once you have one or a couple of vendors to choose from.
Absolutely, and that gets us right into the topic of due diligence. And sometimes we end up skipping straight to this phase if it's a purchase that might not need to go to RFP. Unfortunately, we're not going to take the time to RFP everything in the world, and nor is that really required. So what happens then? What do we need to do? And the due diligence process is a lot like the name implies. It's gathering information from relevant stakeholders and making sure, as Dave said, that everyone's requirements are accounted for. So whether they're from legal or information security or compliance or information technology, you want to make sure everyone has had their concerns addressed or has had an opportunity to speak up. We see this come across a lot in spreadsheets as well. So it's not unlike the RFP process. So it's very similar. You're asking questions, and that might go out in questionnaires or surveys. If we have, as Dave said, fancy software, a lot of times you can incorporate this into an electronic format and email that around and delegate it to the folks who need to provide feedback. And that's great. That provides a lot of visibility, but it's not the only way to gather that information. Sometimes it's just the only way we can do it is to set up a shared spreadsheet somewhere, and that's fine. The reason you want to do this too is as you get into some of the actual deal signing, where you have a contract in place and you're starting to think about what goes along with that, you can make sure that you've gathered every piece of information that you need to make sure that contract reads in the way that you want it to. And a lot of times we also see, it depends on which side of the equation you're on. If you're in the role of, in our case, selling to someone, they may ask to do a site visit, or you may want to conduct one if you're actually in the buying role. We've had a few of these actually happen, and I'm just going to share a quick story on that just to kind of illustrate the importance of it. I know we have a few folks who are part of newer organizations, and I think these things are helpful if people are building kind of a young company for us to share. But also, if you're a part of a larger organization, I think this is something that you deal with every day as well. But we had a site visit planned, and we were very excited. We were shortlisted in an RFP, and things were progressing well. And we conducted a site visit, and thankfully we passed, which was a good thing. But we had a few things that the auditor noted, and the first thing was, do you have certain policies and controls in place for certain scenarios? And we did. Okay, that's great. I see that you do. I see that you created some about 30 days ago when you found out about the site visit, but that was okay too. We have them. But the thing that he did call out was that we hadn't, by all of our evidence, we hadn't shown that we had trained people internally on those policies. And so we had them, and they were things that we were actually doing, and we were really proud of that, and everything was going great. But his view was, if you did a lunch and learn like we did, that's great. People found out about it, but you didn't document it. and if you didn't document it, then from my perspective, I have to say it didn't happen. And so, I can't stress that enough. If you're starting out with this, you're probably doing a lot of great things, and you're securing your environment, and you're taking care of your internal and external customers, but just document it. Get the credit where credit's due, and then when you have an audit, you'll be ready. That again can be stored in Excel. It could be stored in a system like ours, but just make sure you get it documented somewhere. So the next thing I wanted to point out on due diligence really is that it is a point in time, and that it's something that is ongoing. It's something that you can't just one and done and then never look back. And so how often you look back and to what degree and all of that really depends on the information that you've collected and how you have evaluated it and triaged it within your system or your process. And so what we like to do at Onspring is we encourage people to create a hub of information, and we'll just call that a vendor repository for today. In here, you're going to document things like what type of vendor is it, what's the status of that vendor, is it an active vendor, is it someone we did business with 10 years ago but we're just keeping the data, is it a prospective vendor, what are the review dates, are they in some sort of review cycle right now? And then sort of the big item on everyone's list, and this is on my list too, but who are the people involved, and who do I go to if I see that something's about to expire? It sounds really simple, but I'm sure Dave runs into this too, where if you have, let's say, software that's installed around the company, and you're sure that some people are using it, but you're not really sure who and to what extent, and then when is it going to expire, and do we want to renew? Do we like this vendor? Do we like this product? Is there something better out there? If we're not tracking this stuff somewhere, things get automatically renewed, and then somebody comes up later and says, well, I didn't want to renew that. I don't even like that product. Well, you didn't share your opinion, and you didn't get that to the people, procurement or legal who are managing those actions. So, getting everything into a hub where you can manage it and see when things are expiring, who's using it, and for what purpose, and you have all your documents and all your contracts all in one place, really puts you ahead of the game.
If I can jump in there, we've got a client who reached out to us. I had a 60-day renewal tickler on the contract, and they reached out to us 30 days ahead of that. So they were using some sort of vendor repository with a 90-day tickler, and it was great. They reached out and said, hey, the contract's up in 90 days. Our process takes a little bit of time, and can we start that now? And I wish more of our clients used that sort of thing. I mean, that's great. We use that. We use some various technologies for that. And what Chris is showing here, I really like all the different types of information that you can gather here, because as he'll talk about in a minute, that the sentimentality that users have about the relationships that you maintain is equally as important. And where does that live? It has to live somewhere, right? So
yeah. So on the next slide, I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what happens when things don't go so well. So it's great when your vendor relationships are working out and everyone's doing what they said they're going to do and when they said they would do it. But that doesn't always happen. It is planet Earth after all. So what we also like to do is tie any issues or findings or incidents. These things go by various names, but I think everyone gets the idea. Where do we track that, and to what extent, and to whose resolution? This is another thing that systems can help you do, or a spreadsheet. But if you have certain issues that come up, you've probably found them because you have a solid process in place and you're evaluating vendors. So congratulations, you found the issue. That's the first thing, is identifying and discovering it. The second piece is evaluating that issue and triaging it, making sure you don't overly spend time on something that's not that big of a deal, and conversely, don't spend enough time on something that is. So we help with that. And then most importantly, we track these issues almost like little projects to resolution. And so you, again, are establishing an owner over that issue and over that problem to make sure that it's resolved appropriately. And it may be something that requires ongoing oversight. So if it's something that is going to come back again and again, we have that, fortunately, all tied together within your vendor profile. So kind of thinking beyond that, and if we're looking at the entire experience that we have with a vendor internally, this is something that some of our clients have wanted to do more recently, and I think it's just a great idea. Doing some form of an internal satisfaction survey. So this, we've written blogs on it before, but it's just that simple question: do you really like this vendor, and how do you know? I'll be honest, I don't use every product that we've ever purchased for Onspring. I'm not the primary user of every developer tool or of every marketing tool. So I would like to know this information. If we spent money on something, did people see value in it? Is it something that we should renew and continue to do going forward? Or did we have kind of a negative or a mediocre experience? Maybe we want to change it up and do something different in the future. This is a quick way to get that information. So you can send out an internal survey, figure out, A, is it still in use, and is it meeting our needs, and kind of further on down, getting into that value and satisfaction, I think is really important. Dave, I don't know if you have any experiences with this too, but
yeah,
I feel it's pretty common.
Well, and a lot of the software that we use now has some usage reports, and so you can go in and see how many of the users are logging in, what they're doing. If you're a Google Suite business like we are, you can go into the administrative consoles, you can see who's got the security settings and how strong they are. If you use single sign-on applications, you can see the strength of passwords and dual-factor authentication things. We even built that into RFP365 so you can see, the sessions of people logging in and how often they log in and when the last login is. So some of that you can do centrally, and the survey is still very, very, very important because you do need to capture the sentiment, the value proposition, and even what's missing. I mean,
right.
More than just a slider, you might also want to get some text about what's missing there, because when you're up for a contract renewal, it's a really good time to kind of twist the arm of the vendor. And we're vendors ourselves, so but to
please don't twist our arms.
But to be very transparent with them, our users are saying this, and give them the ability to handle that, whether it's a training need or whatever. And you have to do this pretty regularly, because if you do it at the contract renewal perspective, it's going to be one point in time. But if you bake this into a quarterly process, for example, you're likely going to get better information, because maybe there was an incident and maybe it was resolved quickly, or maybe it wasn't resolved. But
right.
If you do this survey regularly, you'll have good data when it's time to renew the contract or not renew the contract.
Right. You just brought up a good point that I think about, but I hadn't considered for this call. But how you manage an incident can be actually a strength. If you're the type of company that is resolving customer issues quickly and efficiently, with respect and diligently, I think it actually almost makes me think higher of that company when they really take care of me. And when you submit a support request, conversely, and you get sort of the cold shoulder, or you get someone who doesn't really care to understand your issue, it automatically makes me want to switch providers. Like, just immediately, it's like, well, I'll show you. I'm going to go try something else. And a lot of this can be solved with communication, with regular follow-up, and just good old-fashioned quality customer service, which I think both of us try to do. So it's really important to look at the human side of vendor management as well. So we couldn't resist putting this slide in because we're in technology, and we have to shamelessly plug a little bit of what we're trying to do here. But this stuff really is applicable whether you're using a tool like Onspring or RFP365 to help, or if you're doing this with a homegrown solution, a spreadsheet, or even one of our competitors. I think what you're looking to get with software is, first of all, ease in the data collection process, and I would say, confidence in the data integrity that is out there. So if it's floating around in an offline world or through email, you start to wonder if you have the most current version of whatever it is you're looking at. Has this been updated? Also, as you grow, we've felt this as we've grown, and it's part of the good things. Growing pains are typically good, but making sure that things are communicated in a way that can be resolved easily and quickly. And if you have 20 to 100 or even thousands of vendors, it becomes hard to manage all of that if you don't have a good, solid process and possibly a system involved. And so that gets us into the accessibility and the collaborative nature of this data. The best results are achieved if people know where to go. There's a single source of information. They can collaborate on it. They can ask for help from other groups if they need it. And they also can then, if you have a workflow or you have certain requirements for approvals, manage that process as well. So internally here at Onspring, we use our own product, and we have a contract review process, probably not unlike a lot of what you guys use. And it's very simple. Our sales team will receive potential contracts, and then they will put them into a queue. The system automatically notifies the folks who need to review and approve them that something is available and waiting. They can go through that very quickly, provide comments, send it back for feedback, and it sort of goes in a back and forth nature like this until all the issues have been resolved on the contract, and then we mark it as a fully executed agreement. And then we've tracked not only that status, but the relevant dates, who was involved, why we purchased that solution, or why we, in our case, sometimes sold that solution. So it's bringing all that data together, not just with what's going on, but more importantly, who was involved and who approved it. The cool part then is once you've done all that, then you have the dates you need and the statuses you need to trigger reminders. And I can get a reminder, let's say 30 days out, that a contract is about to expire or that it's coming up for renewal. Is it something that we want to renew and continue to do? I can think about that before maybe my credit card is automatically charged, or somebody just cuts a PO thinking that that's all good and they haven't heard no, so we're just going to go ahead and renew. It gives you that opportunity to reassess. So again, that kind of gets into the real-time reporting, making sure you're looking at the most relevant and up-to-date information.
And I recognize that managing risk is not the most glamorous job out there, but
come on.
The thing about some of these reports that you can make and share with members of your team, with stakeholders across your company, it helps you. You can make yourself look like a rock star by coming with all this data. But more importantly than the perception of that, you can identify where teams are going off the farm. And we see that all the time. In fact, in my previous consulting world, we always tried to sell around the IT group to go directly to the stakeholders because the cloud makes that easy.
Right.
People can they can put a credit card in and purchase software and do things. And you may have a policy against that, but it happens all the time. And when you start comparing this sort of data against your accounts payable data, and you start to see some things that are going on outside of the official procurement organization, you can really ratchet up your control over risk. Because if your group start using a project management suite that's off the grid, you've got a significant amount of risk out there, perhaps with customer information, protected information, whatever, not under your control, not under a tight contract that's favorable to you. So use this information in conjunction with other tools you have at your disposal, and I think you'll feel like a rock star.
Couldn't have said it better. Okay. So, Anna, are we going to do some questions? We wanted to do a couple things. We wanted to make sure that we took some time to answer all of your questions and any feedback that you guys want to share with us. We're going to be happy to open that up and share with everyone on the line. We can also hop in and kind of take a look at some of the solutions that we've created to help manage this stuff alongside of that. So I might kind of cue that up, and then if you guys, while we're doing that, want to think about some questions that you have, feel free to jot those down and send them over in the chat that we mentioned at the beginning of the call. You just need to type the little at Onspring ahead of that, and I think it should come through, right, Anna?
Yep, definitely. And this is a great time to ask questions because Dave has extensive experience with the RFP process, with the selecting the vendors. So if you have questions about what that should look like or how you should manage that, he has several years of firsthand experience doing that and can answer those types of questions. And Chris has lots of experience with more of the monitoring and the risk assessment long term. So either way, you've got two experts at your disposal who you can really get a lot of information from. So if you want to ask questions, we'd love to answer them. We've got a solid few minutes to do that. So if you want to just go ahead and go to the top of your screen where you'll see that little kind of chat message icon and then chat at Onspring, we'll get those queued up for you. But it's a great time to ask any RFP or any vendor management question. The time is now. I also want to mention that we did write an ebook that gives a little bit of a deeper dive. They've done a great job of presenting kind of an overview today, but we will be sending out that deeper dive ebook along with today's recording after the webinar. So if you want more meat and potatoes, we go in a little bit more detail there. So keep an eye out for that email as well.
Okay, so I just really wanted to take about 2 minutes and show you what some of this might look like in a system. As you can see, once you've begun to track the information, if you have a tool like Onspring or RFP365, you can roll it up into dashboards and reports to kind of help keep your team in the know as to what's going on with your vendor relationships. From the very beginning, from the RFP side and the assessment and due diligence side, all the way through completed contracts and internal satisfaction surveys. And so I'm just kind of going down. This is all real-time information. We can analyze vendors a number of ways by spend or criticality. These are just samples of ways that we've seen our clients begin to triage those vendor relationships. And so it could also be the type of service that they provide. And just to give you a quick example, for a software company like mine or Dave, we spend a lot of time thinking about information security, and we think about our vendors and what that means for ultimately our clients. And so we use tools like this to make sure that we are providing the best possible service to our clients. And so that might rank someone a little bit higher if they're providing, let's say, data center services versus someone who shovels your snow or comes in and cleans the restrooms. You're going to have a different set of criteria that you're looking at. And that could also be the amount of spend that you're looking at. If I scroll back up and kind of jump into a sample vendor record, I'm just going to drill into this chart real quick. I wanted to show you guys what I meant by a hub of information. And so this is just one form, and we're just calling this our vendor form. It's a repository. Some people call it a profile. It's all the same thing. It's putting information about a vendor into a single location. And here we've got just the stuff you'd expect, but a name, very important. But who's the relationship owner? Who do I go to if I have questions about this particular relationship? Some contact information, people that we interact with. You can see it's all just me in here, sample data. But here we've brought in the assessments that we've done, any issues or findings that are in place. We can sort of see very quickly what's the status on that. We can drill in for more information. Back to the spend that we were talking about. Do they have access to confidential information? Maybe the term length of the contract helps us rate vendors appropriately. Anything that we want, we can sort of design our own calculation as we're figuring out what the criticality or what the vendor tier should be. And it's going to vary from different organizations from one to the next. And that's why we built flexibility into both of our products, because Dave and I don't have a crystal ball, and we don't know exactly how everyone should manage this stuff. We have some great starting points and things to think about, but we wanted to build flexibility into both of our solutions so that you're the expert, and you can go out and make the decisions you need to make. You've been hired by your companies as the true experts. We're just providing a tool to help you really do your best work.
If you stay on that screen, one of the questions was about some artifacts. And I use that term in general, but the question was about gathering some information like insurance certificates and things. So beyond just the contract and whatever, it looks like you can attach various items and things that are applicable to that.
Definitely. You can just drag and drop attachments right in here. We have contracts that are in place. We even simple things like, as you had maybe a relationship with a particular vendor over time, you might have lots and lots of contracts with them. Let's say they're all statements of work. You might have 10 plus statements of work, but how do you know which is the parent document? A lot of times in the contracting world, there are parent-child relationships between contracts. There might be a master agreement, there might be a statement of work, and maybe even a couple of change orders. And if you just see a random change order and it's not tied to the right statement of work, or it doesn't roll up to the right master services agreement, it can be really tough to figure out which end is up with some of your contracts. And so we like to keep everything really organized. It also, I think it deserves mentioning that everything that you would put in a system like ours, either one, is searchable. So if you're just looking to find something quickly, you can come in here and type, privacy, just the word privacy, and you're going to come back and land here because that's one of our words that we're capturing. So, everything that you type in here is essentially becoming a keyword that you can search against. So I don't know if you want to chat a little bit about that. I'm going to pull up a survey.
Well, it's funny, like you have the survey there, and which is I think people will want to see. One of the comments or one of the questions also was about vendor feedback. And so if we jump backwards in the process of the selection, if you do conduct an RFP and you have winners and losers, if you've done the process right, you'll have some data to share with the quote losers. And they really do deserve some feedback. We have some reports we've built in our system, and I don't have any good ones to show you today. But we can show an anonymized comparison of how they ranked in different categories against their peers. And that sort of report is very helpful for vendors so that they can reflect on this. Maybe their price was high, and giving them some specifics on that. Maybe they scored low on their approach, and they didn't show that they were going to partner with you or whatever. The more specific feedback you can give them, the better, especially for larger deal sizes. We talk to a lot of vendors. We have 12,000 vendors in the system, and they would love to know why they lost a deal. If they lost $1 million deal, they'd really like to know how to make that better the next time. So if you can call them up, that's great. If you can even give them some written information that they can spread around to their folks, even better. One of the Blue Cross affiliates we work with, they have big deals, but they will actually sit down face to face and give the vendors the feedback, which is you can only do that on the biggest of deals, right? But it's I really respect that transparency.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And on the topic of transparency, I think it's important to get that feedback back up to your decision makers within the organization. And a lot of times, like I was saying earlier, I'm not the primary user of the product or service that we're procuring, but having a survey in a system or in a spreadsheet that I'm sending around just to help quickly gather that information can be very, very useful to just determining how you want to proceed with that vendor. So in this particular example, we're asking questions around integrity. Did we feel like the vendor delivered on its promises? How good is their communication effort? Do we feel that they are reliable? Can we count on them to be there for us when we need their product or service? And then ultimately, what kind of value are we getting? In this case, we can even provide feedback. So we've learned here slightly higher rate than some, but seems to be worth it. Criticality, what if we had to switch? Well, no, not impossible, but might take us a few months to get up to speed. Super useful information to know for people who are making budgeting decisions. So with that out of the way, I think what we want to do, we've got quite a few questions in here, so I'm going to stop chatting, and we're going to go through and try to tackle some of those.
Sarah, do you want to bring up the previous question about, excellent.
Yeah, we talked about that one with the artifacts.
Let's go back up to our first question, which was regarding options for custom reporting of findings. Chris, you want to speak to that?
Options for reporting?
Yep. With the Onspring product, do you have options for custom reporting of findings?
Okay. Yes, we do. So the nice thing about Onspring is if you're tracking data in the system, you can slice and dice that information any which way that you choose. And so if you think about it, really you have a database of all the information that you've gathered, your main vendor record, your contracts, your due diligence process, and then any findings or issues that are coming out of that. You can create, if you think about managing a finding almost just like managing any other project, you can assign those findings out to internal resources, making sure that they are assigned to the appropriate individual for resolution. You can figure out what's your response. So it might be to complete a series of tasks to try to resolve that issue with the vendor. Another option might be you want to proceed with some form of termination. So you can decide what's the appropriate disposition to take and then report on that back up through the system. And if you want, you can even get pretty fancy and bring in some approval processes in place, some workflow that says, this finding has been reviewed by, say, Sarah, and Dave has approved the action or the disposition that we're going to take.
Here's a great question. How have you seen other companies manage vendor risk at the vendor profile level rather than via the engagement?
I'll take that. Yeah, and then
if you would, I just read it and kind of drew it on the whiteboard over here. If I understand that right, it's multiple engagements from the same vendor, and you want to track those separately to see so some of the engagements are going well and some aren't. And so I think the question is, in the system, is it possible to track those separately? Chris, can you track separate engagements from the same vendor? And so you've got ABC vendor,
right,
and then you've got 15 different engagements, and some are going well and some aren't.
Right.
Could you track those engagements separately and be able to say, this one's green, this one's red, this one's green?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's part and parcel to everything that we do with our vendor solution. We expect that we actually tie projects and contracts together. So in this particular example, if you were to have, let's say, a statement of work, a contract that's saying certain things are going to be done by a certain time, we can tie that vendor, that contract, the SOW, to a project, and then we can track in the project record how things are progressing. We might even get pretty granular and attach things like status reports that come from that vendor as they're going through and completing things, or if they're providing you with deliverables that require your sign-off. You can store that information in a project record and make sure that when the project is at its conclusion, you have a record of all the deliverables that were promised, and you have an accounting of the time that was spent and their ability to sort of deliver that by your intended expiration or termination date. As well as any comments or tasks and things that come out of that. I think that's really relevant too, to get all those involved in individual projects an opportunity to post their own feedback. That all can live in the vendor project record.
One of the questions out there, vendor 16, or viewer 16, is the best source of financial information. So a question about vendors' financial stability. And I will say, in of the RFPs that we help our clients with, nearly everybody is asking about financial stability. And unless the company is publicly traded, 98% of the time, I see the vendor dance around that and say, we are privately, we're a private company, we do not disclose our financials. We try to find a middle ground ourselves where we say, we are privately funded by a group of whatever investors or however that is. And some people will note that they are a profitable company or something to try to help you feel that you're making a decision that is that has some good financial meat to it. We obviously do see people who provide their Dun & Bradstreet numbers. I don't find that to be super helpful. We have definitely helped vote on some of our clients and the vendors we use through Dun & Bradstreet, but I think the use of that has really waned in the last years. I don't know the last time I checked out our Dun & Bradstreet profile. So asking for balance sheets and P&Ls, I think, is not going to get you a lot of answers. But if your question is, are you going to go out of business in the next year, looking at their history and especially talking with their customer base, because in our experience, the biggest indicator of how they're going to do in the next year is how are they progressing are they innovating? Do they have clients that are excited to use the product and things? So there are some questions, I think, that you can indirectly assess their financial stability.
Yeah, Dave, I couldn't agree more with that, especially the part about asking vendors for customer references. Don't be afraid to ask that question. If they have done their jobs well in the past, they should have ample references at the ready. And look for situations where potentially you could pick who the references are, or maybe they give you a list of folks to contact, but it's not just their one favorite customer that they're sending you. We just let everyone see all the customers and then say, hey, you tell us who you want to talk to, and that way they can pick if it's someone in their particular industry or in their same line of work. So we try to make it relevant in that way. But Dave's absolutely right. And I look at it truthfully, not just from the sales side, but from the buy side as well. I mean, if I want to know if that company is going to be around and take care of us, which is really what it's about, I'm going to look to things like what kind of customer feedback is out there. I think we live in a Yelp society where we're all used to going out online and reading reviews and honest feedback, and I feel like that's the biggest indicator of the type of experience and the type of service that I'm going to be able to expect from that vendor. The other thing could be just their longevity, how long they've been around. If they've been around for 5 years and their customers say they're wonderful, there's probably a pretty good chance they're going to continue to keep doing what they're doing because they're having success. And that's really what you're looking for, not supposed to how many employees do they have or how many how much was on their P&L, whatever. Because as we all know, there can be, let's say, a lot of employees, and they could be running really inefficiently, and there could be some smaller company that's doing a wonderful job with a lot less, that's just crushing it. So make sure you kind of think about that as well.
If there aren't any more questions, as we start to wrap up here, I want you to think back to Pam.
Yes.
And planning respectfully, assessing carefully, and monitoring consistently. And this is Dave. I would love to leave you all with a question to ponder about the way you engage your vendors in that respectful manner, especially as it relates to due diligence questionnaires. The technology landscape is changing. And one of the most confusing things we see are due diligence questionnaires that have not changed with the times, especially as it relates to software as a service in hosted cloud environments. And so there's a lot of back and forth. It's very inefficient. So I would ask you to go back and ask your organizations, are we asking the right questions to the right vendors? Because you either are leaving some risk out there or you're making a very inefficient process, which is just causing friction throughout your relationships.
No, that's great, Dave. Thank you, Dave Holston and Chris Vantanius. That was awesome. As we mentioned, we'll be sending out today's recording, so if you couldn't quite catch all of it or you couldn't attend at all, we'll have all of that in the recording for you, and then we'll also follow up with our vendor risk management ebook, which is chock full of great tips. Thank you everyone so much for joining today. It's been our pleasure. Have a great rest of your day.
Goodbye.